Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. This is your host, Darren, and this week I had Stephen Sweeney from the McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas at Austin on the show. He's the full-time MBA admissions director, and we had a really great in-depth discussion about the various opportunities and flexibility offered by the Texas MBA. We also talk in depth about what Stephen is looking for, what fit qualities he's after, what values he'd like to see from applicants. So don't miss out on this episode. Here at Touch MBA, we specialize in school selection. So did you know that at our site, touchmba.com, you can actually get your profile seen by admissions officers from the world's top business schools before you apply? We're talking about schools like IMD in Switzerland, IE in Spain, NUS in Singapore, SEEDS in China, HKU in Hong Kong, Rotman in Canada, Carlson and Fisher in the US, ESMT in Germany. The list goes on and on. And I think this is a great way for you to get some feedback on your profile before delving into the application process. So go check that out at touchmba.com/schools. I've been wanting to talk to someone from the McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas at Austin for a long time now. And Stephen Sweeney, who is the Director of Full-Time MBA Admissions, agreed to come on the show. So I'm really excited for this. Just a quick background on Stephen. Stephen actually got his MBA from McCombs in 2011, and he's done a variety of things in his career. He's worked for Teach for America. He's co-founded a startup, and he was last doing consulting for Infosys before joining McCombs. So I think he's got just the whole range of experiences to share with you guys on this episode. So Stephen, thank you so much for joining the show.
Absolutely. You're welcome.
Stephen, so you've been a student and now you're the director of full-time MBA admissions. What makes the Texas MBA unique in your opinion?
Yeah, so I would say there's probably three differentiators that I like to talk about, plus our location as well. So the first is our community. So our students typically have a leave the McCombs better than when they got here mentality. So we're a very student-driven program. So, for example, if our students have an interest in a certain area where they think we can start an initiative, we give them the ability to take this idea and really implement a solution. So, relative to our peers, we have a class size that allows our students to meet someone new every day, but also by the time they graduate, will have an extremely tight and strong network with their classmates. From a cultural perspective, we definitely want our students who are collaborative and competitive at the same time. Students who have this mentality really, we find, thrive in our close-knit community. And then I think talking about the community, you have to include our faculty. So these folks are extremely accessible, they're down to earth, they care about our student success, not just on a homework problem or a case, but really in life. And so our faculty consistently get ranked in the top 5 for their accessibility. So that kind of is our community perspective. The second differentiator, I think, is our program's flexibility. So the fact that we're located on a campus of a premier research institution, our students get to craft their own MBA experience to really make themselves successful in their post-MBA career. So our core classes are a bit over one semester, and then you almost get about 3/4 of your time to really take the plethora of elective options that we have. And so, talking about the flexibility, we have a great career service organization as well as our academic advisors to help our students craft their 2 years. But this is a major, I think, benefit to our students that we see is having this flexibility for them, because it also allows them to leverage the University of Texas. So we're at a massive university in the US and in the world. And so if students want to take a class outside of the McCombs School of Business, we have top-ranked graduate programs in almost all disciplines. So, for example, Some of our students focused on energy can take a couple classes in the engineering school, or some of our students focused on social enterprise can leverage the LBJ School of Public Policy. And so the list goes on and on, but I think that flexibility also attracts a certain caliber of student to our program. Thirdly is really our learning style. So we are a hands-on type of program. So we like our students to leverage what they learn in the classroom and apply it to real-world issues. So this experiential type learning is woven throughout the program. We have offerings such as the MBA Plus micro-consulting projects, where students work for an organization throughout a semester and then give their final presentation at that company's headquarters typically, and fly out and will present to senior executives. We also have different fellows programs. So for example, we have an investment fund, which is one of the oldest in the country, where students invest real money and hopefully they make real money and not lose it. And they also learn how to pitch stocks and really be an active asset manager while in school. So those three things, but you also, I think, can't talk about McCombs without talking about Austin, which is, a great, beautiful, warm, thriving business community. We have some of the largest tech companies here in the city, but we also have a thriving startup scene. You can't beat the lifestyle, the live music, the incredible food. And it certainly doesn't hurt that the Texas economy is strong and it's headquartered to some of the most largest Fortune 500 companies in the world in one city. So I think, Darren, answered your question, really those three things plus Austin stick out in my mind.
Yeah, and that MBA Plus program that you guys have, does that take place in the year one or year two? And do all students qualify to be able to work in that program? How does that work?
Yeah, so it kind of going with the flexibility theme here, students, it's an option. So not all students have to do it, but all students can if they want. So, and they also can choose their semester. So for our career changer students, we typically recommend them doing a plus project in their fall semester of their first year. So when they go to interview in January, say they want to work in consulting, they can actually work for a consulting firm as a plus project and either interview with that firm, or they can actually say they have experience consulting. So what they just don't sit down in the interview and say, they're interested in this particular area, but they come from a background that is, a military veteran, for example. So that's kind of what we recommend for our career changers. But we see also people who want to get deeper in their discipline also do a plus project, but they can do it in the fall. They can do another one in the spring. So typically, max they can do 4. Very rarely would a student do 4. It's kind of in that first year. And some of our second years will choose to do a plus project in maybe one of their passion areas. So we've worked with the Houston Rockets basketball team. We've worked with the Texas Rangers. We worked with some music companies. So those typically can be some of the second year projects as well.
Yeah, and back to your point about the outstanding faculty that you have, when I was researching the school, I saw that you allow students to pick from up to 20 concentrations, and you have lots of double degrees as well available to students. And I know that the UT Austin faculty is, top ranked in many, in fact, all the disciplines, at least by U.S. News and World Report. So it was actually overwhelming to me because it seems like there's so much there. And so I was wondering if, you could kind of single out or highlight some of the places where McCombs really stands out academically. Yeah,
so it's I don't think we're known as just a marketing school or just a finance school or just a social enterprise school, which is nice. So we typically get students who are interested in a lot of different areas, which makes for an interesting, well-balanced student body. I think the first thought in some people's minds is energy. So we certainly have a large expertise in energy, and that kind of goes with our faculty. It goes with some of our electives that can go extremely deep, like students can take petroleum accounting, or they can take certain classes that frankly probably aren't offered in many other universities. And that goes along with tying into a lot of our corporate sponsors and corporate folks who come to recruit on campus. So that's certainly an area that we thrive in. We've seen a lot of interest in the technology sector from our students, and so our IROM department's very strong. We see quite our entrepreneurship offerings with Texas Venture Labs continues to grow with interest. We have a top 10 marketing program, so I can go on and on about kind of how well-rounded our offerings are, but those are just certain areas where I think we play well, and also we see quite a bit of student interest in.
Yeah, so I mean, as Touch MBA is a startup itself, and I have a lot of friends that also are starting companies, especially in the digital space, and they all mention Texas, especially Austin. Many of them live there. They're so excited to be there, and I'm kind of seeing this confluence between what you just mentioned, this strength in technology, entrepreneurship, and marketing kind of coming together. And I know that it seems, at least from your last career placement report, that you're sending a lot of grads into these areas. Has that been a growing trend for Texas MBA students, or has it always been that way?
Yeah, so I think it continues to increase. We've always had a strong interest from our students from technology and always have some of the best tech firms recruiting here. But yeah, over the last couple years, and actually this year in particular, so just consulting happens to be, for the last few years, and maybe even longer, our number one industry that we place students. So we're placing between 25 and 30% of the class at all the top major consulting firms in the world. And so that continues to be one of our strong suits. For the first year since I know, technology has come in the second place for the percentage of students working after graduation. Previously, it was always financial services, and that happens to be number 3. So that definitely, we see an increase in there. We continue to get students from the Bay Area and also place back in the Bay Area and also Seattle. But now that Austin has Facebook, Google, Apple is opening their second biggest office in Austin, plus all of the startups that are going on in town, some of our students are certainly finding a great deal of success actually staying local in Austin.
Interesting. And you also mentioned that collaborative and competitive culture, that yin and yang, if you will. And having gone through the program yourself, can you expand upon what that means to you? Because I think that might be maybe hard to understand for some of our listeners.
Sure. Yeah, so it kind of goes to do your fit. So you'll hear a lot of admissions folks talk about fit. So when we're thinking about that, we really want to know how you'll be involved in the program and in the Austin community. So what does that look like for you? How does that align to your career goals? Are you planning on taking leadership roles in certain organizations? You can't necessarily talk about venture capital without talking about our venture fellows or some of our other organizations that revolve around that. So how have you done the research, and what does your trajectory look like here? Because Darren, we talked about the flexibility. We want to make sure our students have a path when they get here, because we don't prescribe necessarily 4 semesters to them. We want to make sure, again, that they have the drive to start new things. So we talked about them rolling up their sleeves and really leaving the place better than when they started. It goes from starting different scholarship initiatives to starting new fellows programs. So that's kind of one side of it, but we also want, going back to the collaborative, competitive, we want to make sure that they play well with others. So, looking teamwork examples, that they've shown engagement throughout their career, they understand differences from other people, they respect differences. So all of that we're looking for throughout the admissions process. And a lot of it is, have they done the introspection also to make sure that they can hit the ground running at McCombs from day one.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you just a little bit more about Austin as well. I'm personally very curious. I saw you guys had a stat on your website that it was ranked like the 3rd best place in the U.S. for young people to live in. And for some of our listeners who are less familiar with the U.S. and Texas itself, or Austin itself, I should say. Could you just tell them a bit more about what it's like to be a student there? Yeah, so
I think the secret is out, at least for U.S. folks. Austin is one of the best cities, if not the best city to really live in, to be a young professional in, to be a student in. And there's a few reasons for that. It's a highly educated city. The cost of living is relatively inexpensive, especially if you look on, maybe some of your listeners are looking more on the East Coast or West Coast, it is certainly less expensive than those cities. It's a warm climate. It's also a very safe city, so we get a significant number of our applicants are bringing significant others or children, and so it's a great place to raise a family. There's great schools. And then it's the live music capital of the world, and so it just has a lot of excitement going on and a lot of startups again that bring some interesting perspective to the city.
Is it like a big city, or?
I've lived in New York. It's certainly not the feeling of Manhattan. It's a middle-sized city, so there's plenty to do, but it's not overwhelming. And so I think from a student perspective, it's an advantage. And it's an advantage that, Austin grew up surrounded by the University of Texas was basically Austin at its beginning. And so the city's grown up around it. And now it's a major city because, as we talked about, all of these companies moving here, and it actually was one of the fastest, or is one of the fastest growing cities in the U.S. year after year for the last few years. And so there's a lot going on, but it's not like our students need to drive over 6 bridges to get to downtown, subways. You can literally walk out of campus and be at an executive's office within 10, 15 minutes. And so that is nice. And the business climate continues to get better and better here. I think it's nice that Austin is basically less than 3 hours to Houston, less than 3 hours to Dallas. And so we're kind of in this sweet spot of the state. We have, I believe, 3 of the top 10 biggest cities in the U.S. are actually in Texas, and we are right in the middle of all of them. So that's nice as well.
No, that's great. And I think that'll really help our listeners, just get a better feel of the city. If we could now kind of shift our focus to admissions. We hear about fit all the time. Applicants hear about fit. What are those fit qualities for the Texas MBA?
We look at applicants throughout the whole cycle, and so I think just a word of caution to everybody who's listening is, every interaction that you have with someone from a Texas MBA program is going to be looked at. And so we want to make sure that your interactions with our students are professional, even if it may be, in a social setting. Your interactions with the front desk are extremely professional and respectful. And so we look at all of that because we prefer people who have that type of mentality, who are that type of person, good people on the inside, rather than, some rock star who thinks they're the best thing ever. And so that's really kind of at a ground level, some things that we look at in some areas where applicants may stray, their communication style with the admissions committee and certain things. So that's just from that perspective. But again, we do a lot of teamwork here in terms of classes. And so we have a cohort of 4 cohorts of about 65 or 70 students in each cohort. And then you get assigned a study team. And your study team is very different from who you are. And so, for example, in my study team, we had a woman from South Korea who was focused on marketing, a finance whiz from India, a politician from California, and an engineer. When you graduate, you'll obviously be working potentially in a multinational where you have teams that are very different from yourselves. So we like to simulate that type of environment. And so we want to make sure that you can get along with all of these folks. But at the same time, we also win. So that being said, we do a lot of collaborative work in class, but we also win and like to win in a lot of these case competitions. And so if you look at our national energy finance competition, we've actually won 4 out of the last 5 years. We light our Texas tower burnt orange when a team wins. And so that's the type of, we don't just want to be the collaborative side. We also want students who are very driven, again, professionally, academically. So that's who we're looking for ultimately.
Interesting. And those cohorts, how do they last through the entire core courses?
They do. So they last through the core. After the core, our students will take different electives, and so they somewhat organically fall to the side, but a lot of our students will continue to re-engage with them in same classes, or if you're in an advanced finance class, you can ask your finance team member, even if they're not in it. And so it's really up to the students how they want to leverage those relationships.
Got it. And I also noticed that you guys accept LinkedIn recommendations as well as, your one recommender. And I was wondering, I think you recently wrote a blog post about it, but at least on the podcast, could you share what you're looking for from that recommendation?
Yeah, so this is the first year we are doing this. We are not familiar with anyone else doing it, which is exciting. But basically, just to give you a little bit of background, Darren, we found that, once our students get here, LinkedIn plays a pretty major role in their recruiting strategy. So we have different extracurricular courses on, beefing up your LinkedIn profile. What does that mean? What does that look like? We're seeing from our career team that more and more hiring managers are looking at LinkedIn profiles. So our students anyway have to get these things going once they get here. So that was an impetus for us to decide, okay, why don't we have our applicants, if they want, submit us one of their recommendations from their LinkedIn profile. So it happened from that kind of lens where this is something they should be doing anyway. Let's see if they can do this rather than maybe asking someone else to recommend them and creating extra work for someone if they already have something. So it's totally optional. They can choose to submit a letter of recommendation through the traditional means, which most schools are following, where they fill out a form and it goes to recommender. The recommender uploads the letter, which is great. It's too early to tell how many people will leverage our LinkedIn methodology since October 13th is our first deadline, but I would suspect the majority of students will go the traditional route, which is great. It's worked for years. That's totally fine. But if they want, they can fill out a form on our application. They can populate it with their LinkedIn URL. And then as an admissions committee and different readers on the admissions committee will go to their LinkedIn profile and actually read what that recommendation says. So we're not looking for all that different information versus the traditional letter versus LinkedIn. But part of the exercise actually is, can the applicant choose and do they use good judgment on which method they choose? So if it's not a great review on LinkedIn or if it's too short, we want to make sure that the recommender or the applicant actually knows what the decision is.
That's the one obstacle I might see, is because on LinkedIn, the recommendations tend to be shorter, maybe a paragraph. So, would that be long enough for you?
I think, just me personally saying, it's really about the quality, not the quantity. So you can get pretty insightful recommendations depending on them that may be in that length range, but I think you're right. A lot of them are short. We'll see if applicants if they're getting a recommendation on LinkedIn, give them a little bit more, sit down with them like they may do for their traditional letter to see if it comes out a little bit longer. So it's still kind of TBD on how they will play out.
Well, I think it's a neat initiative, and I'll definitely follow up with you to see how that goes. Yeah, is there anything else, kind of unique about your application process that you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I think I like to think at least we are on more of the cutting edge of technology a little bit with our application. So we have already, for the last 2 years, been actually accepting not just written essays, but we actually in our essay 1 accept 3 different options. And so if we suggest if you're a good writer, you simply can write the essay. If you like to be in front of the camera and have a little bit of video editing skills, you can certainly choose to submit a 1-minute video. Or if you're a little bit more creative, you can certainly choose an About Me profile to answer our first essay question. And so that, I think, sets the tone for the overall application. Now we somehow have this LinkedIn integration. We have some optional getting to know you section where we've seen some really interesting Pinterest boards about why McCombs, why the Texas MBA. So there are all sorts of social avenues that if the applicant wants, the admissions committee can get to know them. But again, all of it is optional in that sense, and we provide that optionality for the students so they can choose the best way that they want us to get to know them.
And who interviews students? Is it admissions committee members or students?
So we're an invitation to interview only school. And so we will, after an applicant submits their application, it will be reviewed and a decision will be determined by the admissions committee whether to extend an interview. And an interview invitation can come out at any time, more or less during the round. And so once the interview invitation is sent, there's a few different options that the applicant can choose to interview. And so they can choose to interview with an alum in their local area. They can choose to come to campus to interview. Typically, if they come to campus, it will be with a trained second-year student. If they choose to do a Skype interview, which is fine, typically that will be with a trained second-year student. And then admissions committee members will travel to do some interviews in some what we call hub locations. So some of our largest markets where it makes sense, where we can do quite a few in a couple days. And so we will be, for example, in round one, we will be in Shanghai and Seoul, Mumbai, New Delhi, New York, Chicago, DC, San Francisco, Mexico, Panama. So those types of markets, we will be, someone from the admissions committee will be in person. But again, Darren, we don't have a preference in types of format from an admissions committee perspective. We would hope if you're from Texas, which you would come to campus, but if you're in Singapore, we understand. So again, that we really want to make sure that we provide a convenience factor for the applicant, but also, you know, if they want to come here and they want to check out Austin for the first time, like that is highly encouraged as well. They can do a class visit that's integrated into their interview. They can go out to lunch, go out to coffee with the students. So there are other initiatives if students want to come here to interview. That's certainly encouraged as well.
And your alumni and student interviewers, will they just have like the resume of the applicant or the whole application? And
Yeah. So we call it blind, where they only have the resume of the applicant, and we do that very strategically to make sure that there's no preconceived notions prior to the interview.
I think the interview is such an important part of the process. And I mean, would you have any tips for our listeners on how they can do their best?
You know, I think, can they articulate why McCombs is the best program for them is baseline. So we want to make sure you've done the research, but you also know what you're getting into. And so we want students who have their eyes wide open when they get here, they know what to expect, and all that comes with not just research, but does it align with their career goals? We talked about culture, our collaborative and competitive culture, does that jive with them? Is that where they thrive? Our class size tends to be relatively smaller when we're looking at other top 20 programs. So is that 270 a year? Certainly not tiny, but we're also not 900 either. So is that something that would resonate with them? So that is kind of the baseline question in my mind that they must be able to answer concisely, but also in an in-depth manner. Aside from that, we are not asking case-based questions like a consulting interview. We are not necessarily trying to trip up an applicant at all. We really are looking at behavioral type questions, how they performed historically, how have they worked in a team, what types of goals and how they thought up through all that. So it's not necessarily the questions aren't difficult on paper. It's really how they interact with the interviewer and how prepared they come.
What about for international students? Are there any sort of no-nos you see a lot that, you just want to, or any tips that you have for international applicants? Or is it pretty much the same?
It's similar, I would say. We've increased our international percentage over the last couple of years. So we actually went from 19%. We're at 28% right now, which is a good thing. We want to make sure that they come and understand what the MBA at UT has to offer. So if possible, and they're admitted, we have, depending on the student, we have English language courses that we'll offer before classes start. We have international orientation. We have a career service member who is great and dedicated to just international students. But we really want to make sure that they've thought through what's happening. I think the general advice for them is similar for domestic. We talked a little bit about making sure you respect every interaction throughout everything, and so that's pretty similar.
Yeah, and I can definitely relate to that point in particular because, when I used to be an admissions director, it's the worst when someone treats you with a lot of respect and is cordial with you, but then is, maybe rude or impolite with the more, quote unquote, lower people on the totem pole. I mean, it's so telling about you as a person. And I think this is not just for MBA admissions. This is for life in general. Any last admissions tips that you could share with us?
Just talking about what happens after the submit button happens, just so your listeners can maybe make a picture in their mind. Each application will go through multiple reviews. We talked a little bit about the invitation to interview. That can happen at any time during the round. Again, we don't necessarily have a preference for what type of interview format you choose. We will sit, if people can picture this, literally in a room with the entire admissions committee and talk about everyone after they've been read multiple times. And so or we'd say file, but it's now online, will get looked at multiple times. And so that's kind of how the process works. Again, we talked about the essay one. I get quite a few questions on what format. We're agnostic to that, to choose what makes most sense for you. The question there, and if you don't know, is basically introduce yourself to your classmates. And so use that, they should picture themselves in front of a cohort room of their peers. So you're not introducing yourself to me or to the dean or to someone else on the admissions committee. It really is to your peers. And so what would you tell them your first day of class? I think you would tell them just about who you are professionally or just about who you are personally. You'd probably combine the two. And so if students have that or applicants have that mindset, I think it will help them write that essay. I think the most difficult part is that it's 250 words, and so they have to be concise and really pick and choose what they share. Essay 2, we talked a lot about the qualities of what we are looking for, and so that essay really hits on all of that. And so it's a longer essay. We are looking for the arc of where you've been, what you're trying to do, and how you will get there using the MBA, specifically the Texas MBA. Recommendations, pick and choose whichever option you would like. We only require one letter, and so that is fine. So that's really, I think we've walked through quite a bit of what we're looking for there.
Yeah, can students submit a second recommendation, or you prefer that they only submit one?
They can, so totally optional again, but if they have multiple recommendations on the LinkedIn profile, they can prioritize which one they want us to look at, but we're going to look at all of them just because we're there. When it comes to the traditional method, they certainly can submit more than one. We don't encourage submitting a lot, but we will certainly look at all of the ones you submit. So if we recommend, if it's from a different perspective, certainly go for it. So if you want to get the professional recommendation from your manager, that's great. And then if you work on a nonprofit or have done something outside of work and have a mentor and you want them to also submit a recommendation, that's completely fine as well. So we'll certainly enjoy reading that side of it as well.
Fantastic. And then in terms of financing the MBA, could you tell us more about your scholarship process and let us know what percentage of your class gets scholarships and how they can improve their chances?
Sure. So our scholarship pool, really varies year to year. So it varies based on how much money the endowments spin off in a particular year. It also varies based on the quality of our applicant pool. But what I will say, Darren, is on our website, there are quite a few different types of scholarships that we offer. It kind of goes from your traditional merit-based funding where we assess an applicant based on their actual MBA application to us. They don't have to submit anything additional. That is kind of one source of where students are eligible. It's all students. It's not just international. It's not just domestic. So we have the traditional merit-based funding. We also have scholarships aimed at just females. We have scholarships that go towards winning. If you win our Texas Venture Labs competition, you can be eligible for scholarships. So there are different ways that in different types of scholarship opportunities out there that hopefully cover a lot of different types of applicants. We are one of something that we're proud of since last year. We are one of the starting few schools that were part of the RAMBA scholarship. So reaching out to the for our LGBT community is something that we were very excited about. We had 2 students was the maximum we could allocate to based on the organization, which we were able to do this year. So definitely I encourage the applicants to really do some research on our site to figure out what types of scholarships make most sense for them. And then we also have a pool of scholarship money dedicated to our second-year students. So even if an entering student doesn't receive a recruiting scholarship, the possibility exists for them to receive some sort of funding their second year. And then something, Darren, that just came out, I believe last week, is the Forbes ROI ranking that happens every other year. And so we come out 14th in that, number 3 for public schools. And so that ranking is totally based on ROI. And so that is something that I think we should be proud of, because we see the return, in a very strong way for all of our students. And that's just whether you're paying regular tuition, whether you're not, that is something that we can really hang our hats on, I think.
Yeah, so I'll be sure to link to that scholarship page you mentioned, as well as the Forbes ranking. But in terms of those merit scholarships, how important is it, for example, to score above the class average on the GMAT, or for your GPA? Because I think a lot of applicants, an MBA is expensive, and while the ROI, like you said, is you guys are top ranked, that's forefront on their mind.
Yeah, so I think you have to be, just like we evaluate an application on, and we haven't talked much about scores, so I'm happy to talk about that more, Darren, if you'd like. So that's one component, right? The letters of rec is a component, how well your essays are, how well you interview. So all of these combined is what we're looking for when we're talking about scholarships. So it's not just someone who has a 780 on their GMAT is automatically going to be allocated funding, right? It's people who have the full package and who we feel, embody what the Texas MBA student should be. And so again, going back to fit. So that's why we don't require any additional paperwork, and we actually assess applicants. Typically, when we assess them for admission, we also assess them to determine whether we could possibly allocate them something. And so it almost happens in an organic way when we're sitting admissions committee, so we know who the people are who are strongest from every aspect. And it's not just one person or 2 people, it's really the whole admissions committee has a say on how different merit funding is allocated. And so I can't say it's super important to score. It certainly helps because it's one element. But if your English skills are lacking or your interview is weak, that's something that we'll take into consideration as well. So it certainly depends.
Maybe one way to think about it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you want to be like the top 20% of the class, not just in terms of your academic performance, but your work experience, if that's strong for you, or your leadership experience, or like you said, your values really match the McComb ethic there and values there. If we could talk about careers at McCombs, could you let us know what makes McCombs special from that career perspective?
First of all, I think our career services team is one of the best in the business. And so they, like we said earlier, we have someone who's dedicated to our international students. We have coaches and advisors who are, in a functional area, so they know how to advise students. And then part of our career services team that may not get spoken about as much or even is as visible to students and applicants is our whole side of the career team that works with employers. So our employer relations team that talks to employers and travels and makes sure that the Texas MBA is on the top of the list of every big company that our students want to work at, so they come to campus and recruit our students. And so that combined, that team does a wonderful job in making sure our students get to where they want to go, and you can see it in our placement rates, you can see it in our average salaries, you can see it in, I think, more difficult to measure, but how happy our students are. So that's kind of one piece of it. But you can't really talk about the career side without also talking about our alumni base. And so, we have just an incredible, passionate alumni base out there. I'd say the Texas Longhorn is, if not the most recognizable brand in higher education, it's got to be up there. And so we talked a little bit before, Darren, before the podcast, about how I worked in Singapore for a little bit, in Hong Kong, and in both airports, without fail, every time I was there, someone would be wearing a Texas Longhorn t-shirt. If you put up the horns, people get extremely excited. So that's kind of another aspect of it, where if our students call on an alum, they will get a response back. And so we have the larger UT alumni base, which is over 450,000 people. But we also have the McCombs base, and then you have the McCombs MBA base. And so there's almost 3 different networks that you're all part of that are all extremely strong, where we see our students leveraging for employment, but also just for professional development. And so that is another area where I think from a career perspective helps our students, because a lot of our recruiters are alums, and as well as a lot of people in top leadership positions in their companies want to continue to hire Longhorns.
I was just wondering, do a lot of your students who participate in the MBA Plus consulting projects, do they end up working for those firms? Is that or one way of trying to get an in with those companies?
Yeah, it's definitely a mix. So some companies will certainly use it as almost a semester-long interview, and then vice versa, students will use it to make sure culturally they fit with that organization. So it's almost a win-win there. Other plus projects are with, for example, a startup in Austin will have just gotten some funding from a venture capital firm and wants some advice on how to allocate it efficiently. And so that company may not necessarily be looking to hire someone, but they need some strategic guidance fast from some smart folks on what they should be doing. So it really spans the spectrum, but we see certainly a lot of students leveraging that for their interviews, certainly when they're interviewing for their internship, if not directly with the company.
And are you seeing, or do you anticipate any other trends with where your students are going?
So I think 2 things that we're very excited about. So one is more on the material side of things. We're building a brand new graduate business school building. I bring that up there because I see that being, and Tina Mabley, who is our assistant dean, and Eric Hurst, who's our associate dean, can talk about this much more eloquently than I can, but it's really going to be a place where our alumni have a place to gather, where it's going to be connected to our executive conference center. That's a hotel, so actual business conferences will be held in our building. So our students will have a lot of access to business leaders just very organically. And so I see that continuing. I see us in that positive direction, continuing to move, continuing to climb. The other exciting thing that is on campus is school, which is very exciting. So it's the Dell Medical Center. It's exciting for a lot of reasons, healthcare related, like community health. But from an MBA perspective, we are going to see how we're going to integrate with another premier medical school on campus that you see the healthcare interest particularly climbing, or doing some interesting, innovative things in that space. So those are just 2 things right off the bat that I think applicants can get excited about right now.
Great. And what's the best way for candidates to connect with your students and alumni?
Yeah, so we have a couple ways. So on our website, the most straightforward way is we have a directory of current students and their concentrations, what they're studying, and where they're from. And so applicants can certainly reach out directly to students. We also have a similar database for our alums, so prospects and applicants can reach out to some alums in their area or their area of interest. Obviously, we have visiting campus, which would be a great way. We travel all over the world as well, and have alums at many of our events. So we have on our website an events listing area where people should definitely check out. And then we have an email address that is texasmba@mccombs.utexas.edu, which a prospect or an applicant can email at any time, and we're happy to make a connection with a student here that has a similar interest.
Yeah, that directory that you guys have is awesome. I mean, I really wish more schools put up a similar directory. It also, in my opinion, speaks a lot about your students willing to represent the school because, as we know, MBA students are super busy, and just the fact that they're willing to put their email out there and is a big sign. So, yeah, thanks for providing that service, and I hope more schools do that.
One other, I think, just one example, talking about culture and fit. We have over 150 student volunteers on our McCombs Ambassador Committee, and their sole volunteer job is to help the admissions committee. And so that, I think...
150 out of, including both classes, or 150 per class?
It's about 70 to 75 per class.
Wow.
So
still a huge percentage.
It's a huge, we can't even fit them in the office here. So literally that just goes to tell you, how passionate our students are about this place and just what a great experience they're having, because obviously they wouldn't be part of this and help us continue to improve the legacy without, having a great experience themselves.
And could you share something about the MBA program that most candidates would be surprised to hear about?
Two areas that stick out to me. So one is our communication coaches, which tends to be an under-leveraged resource for students. So we actually have some are PhD communication folks, others are ex-executives or corporate communication folks who are retired, but our students have access to them for a certain number of hours every semester. And so, for example, our international students, they can go and really practice on their speaking. They can go and do dry runs through, interview prep where you get recorded and you actually point out different communication flaws. We have case competitions where our communications coaches will come and storyboard out what the presentation looks like at 4 a.m. for an 8 a.m. presentation. And so we have all of these types of folks that really can help a good student get to that next level, either in an interview or just in their daily, life. And so that's an area that I think we see continuing increasing, but definitely another piece of the program that is worth mentioning. And then the other piece is, we talked about it, but you have the University of Texas at your fingertips. And so McCombs is an amazing place. UT is also an amazing place. So we sit in the heart of the university. And so if you want to leverage, there's so much going on here that stepping outside of McCombs may be beneficial sometimes. And so taking a class in a different top graduate school, like our entrepreneurs may take a class in the law school, right, to figure out what type of incorporation should be an LLC.
How many classes can they take outside of the MBA program?
So we say 2, but if they have a particular reason to take more, that's possible. Another example of this, Darren, is our Texas Venture Labs organization, where I'll try to explain it quickly, but basically startups in the community they have to have at least one co-founder in Austin, will apply to be part of Texas Venture Labs. It's our own incubator or accelerator on campus. And our students will apply to be consultants for those startups. And so our students there'll be a couple business school students, an engineer or 2, and a law student or 2 on a team. And so our students, as part of a class, can actually work cross-functionally while consulting for a real startup while they're in school. So that's just another area, and it shows you kind of our hands-on experiential type learning that can take place while our students are here.
That's really neat. And my last question to you, Stephen, is what was your favorite part about going through the MBA program at McCombs?
My story about why UT was I came and visited for a weekend and met a lot of my future classmates at that weekend. I met my roommate that I was going to live with. And so it really has to be the people for me. I think 99% of our alums, when I do events, they say the people. So sometimes I try to think of something different, but my heart is really the people in the community. I continue to be, I was just in Asia doing my alum. It's not just alums, right? These are people that I truly care deeply about that we go out after. And so those connections that you make are really lifelong connections.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for sharing your insights on the program. It was great to have you on the show.
My pleasure, Darren. Thank you very much.